discussion is on harnessing incentive for workable economic cooperation and integration. This session will be chaired by Professor Shiro Armstrong. Professor Shiro Armstrong is a professor of economics at Crawford School of Public Policy in the College of Asia and Pacific at the Australian National University. He's director of Australia-Japan Research Center, co-editor of East Asia Forum, and director of East Asian Bureau of Economic Research. He is also visiting professor at Keio University in Japan, research associate at the Center of Japanese Economy and Business at the Columbia Business School, visiting lecturer at University of Tokyo, visiting fellow at Research Institute of Economy, Trade and Industry, Japan, and research associate at New Zealand APEC Study Center. With this, I hand over the floor to Professor Shiro Armstrong.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And it's a real honor for me to be moderating this final panel from what is a very productive and full 3 days of deliberations. I see many friends and colleagues online and very much looking forward to discussion. So we have had a very productive set of discussions on fostering regional cooperation and integration in Asia to achieve growth and high income. And now we're looking at harnessing incentives for workable economic cooperation and integration. So how can we create and align incentives for economic cooperation and for economic integration? We have many frameworks and arrangements, but they are overlapping. They have big gaps, and it's unclear whether they're up to the task given the uncertainties we all face. We are in a bottom-up world where regional and sub-regional initiatives and arrangements will be important in patching up the broader multilateral system in the provision of global public goods. So here in Asia, we have the collective weight, the imperative, and responsibility to contribute. And I think that's come through in a lot of the presentations, even from just today. So how can we drive regional cooperation in the important areas identified by Professor Jeffrey Sachs just a little earlier? APEC and ASEAN have overcome the collective action problem in the past by organizing themselves with non-binding voluntary cooperation that practiced concerted unilateral liberalization and reform, and that helped promote open regionalism. I think Jamel called this a form of silent integration just before. There are other proposals and ideas for aligning incentives. Danny Kwa advocates for inadvertent cooperation. Adam Posen has proposed principled plurilateralism, and there are many other ideas. I think through this last panel, we can help think through different priorities and how we might organize and harness these incentives for cooperation and integration. So we're fortunate to be joined by 4 expert panelists to discuss this topic. They'll have 10 minutes each. I'll introduce them in order right now at the beginning, but only very briefly because they have very big bios and they are available online. So the ordering is slightly different from the program as well. Each will have 10 minutes, and we'll start with Dr. Lin Yang, Deputy Executive Secretary of ESCAP. Following Lin Yang, we'll have Carlos Kuriyama, who is the Director of the Policy Support Unit in the APEC Secretariat, of course, and the Brains Trust there for a very long time. Following Carlos, we'll have Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, who's Chairperson and Independent Director of the Pakistan Stock Exchange, former Governor of the State Bank of Pakistan, former Finance Minister of Pakistan, and of course, UN diplomat, among many other things. And we'll wrap up finally, before we open up for broader discussion, with Professor Peter Drysdale from the ANU here with me, who was instrumental in thinking through and formalizing those ideas I mentioned about open regionalism and concerted unilateralism. So with that, let me pass to Ms. Lin Yang. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Armstrong. And I also thank the kind invitation by ADBI for this very, very important event, and also for you, Professor Armstrong, sharing with us the highlights from previous sessions, which really set in a good stage for the further discussion. And I'm also thrilled to see our former Executive Secretary, Dr. Shamshad here. And I would like to share with participants and the panelists that today is our last day of the 5th committee of the macroeconomic policy, poverty eradication, and the financing. So we are going to close the session in about an hour, and I may need to leave the session a little bit earlier. So very quickly, I think I have those very, very fresh inputs from the committee. This is the first committee after we have the financing for development conference, the 4th one, which was held in late June, early July in Spain. And what I can share is that here the discussion overall atmosphere is still very constructive. Our member states try to reach agreements and through a very, very pragmatic approach and within some very focused area. So that is a strong message I feel, and that's the spirit of a collaboration, the spirit of cooperation is pretty strong here. We need to find the best way, the best approach to have all the partners and together in the room. So, and also, through a 3-day conversation, we do have a reality check of the overall situation we are facing in this region. So I would like to share a few and, maybe more focusing on the challenges side. Internally, we see there are 3 challenges which we need to tackle in the near, mid-term, and the longer run. The first one is economic convergence has decelerated since the global financial crisis. Less than half of the Asia-Pacific developing economies managed to narrow per capita income gaps with the United States between 2010 and 2024. And the less than one-third, had achieved a modest 1% convergence rate per annum. The second internal challenge is the labor productivity. The labor productivity growth also moderated. In all Asian sub-regions, labor productivity growth peaked prior to 2008, decelerated after the global financial crisis, and dropped further after the COVID-19 pandemic. The third challenge, internal one, is the growing pressure from the middle income trap. As more Asian countries cross upper middle income threshold and move towards high income. That includes, for example, older growth engines such as capital accumulation, rural-urban migration, low productivity, labor-intensive manufacturing. Those are the old engine growth, and gradually lose steam as income and the wages rise. But at the same time, the new growth engines, including high-tech manufacturing, modern services, and innovation-driven digital economy, feature high entry barriers and typically require greater upfront investments, more trials and errors, and more years to bear concrete economic benefits. Externally, we also see like 2 major challenges. The first one is deepening the smile curves. The deepening smile curves increasingly squeeze the value addition share of labor-intensive manufacturing in global value chain, eroding economic opportunities created by the global value chain participation for developing countries. The profits and the quality jobs further concentrate on upstream and the downstream global value chain segments such as innovation, branding functions, marketing, and finance. The second, I think everybody, I believe the previous version, the panel discussion also touched upon this, is the rising protectionism. The rising protectionism has seriously eroded the multilateral rule-based global trade framework and economic order, exposing smaller, in particular the smaller countries, LDC, LDCs, CIS countries, to unilateral actions of their powerful trading partners, and challenging the foundation of a free and fair economic cooperation and the export-led development strategy of Asian countries. So in this context, there is a growing urgency of economic upgrading to break this middle income trap and sustain economic prosperity in the future. Through our research and analysis, in particular the 2025, our flagship economic and social survey, we suggest and recommend that to achieve this, and this require more proactive role of the state to work closely with the private sector and the market to deliberately and collaboratively promote upgrading into new economic sectors of a higher productivity, technological sophistication, and income potentials. So the role of the state. Opportunities also exist in clean technology manufacturing. Asia is uniquely positioned to capture value addition potential of clean technology manufacturing and achieve synergy between economic development and the green transformation. Our region has already secured a dominating position in all clean technology manufacturing sectors and is a global leader in clean technology development. Asia's vast and extremely competitive production network will allow it to capture a sizable share of the faster-growing global markets for clean energy manufacturing products and retain associated jobs locally. So the faster-growing clean technology manufacturing FDI we witness is extending related value chain from existing hubs such as China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea to emerging production bases in Southeast Asia, South and Southwest Asia, making green development more inclusive across countries and reinforcing Asia's competitive edge in this sector. And also another very, very important factor is the ongoing economic digitalization, which further links regional markets and economy, while the AI revolution is poised to significantly reduce communication barriers through automated translation. It will allow closer economic cooperation among peoples of different countries and enable further deepening in the global division of labor. In particular, trade of services may benefit significantly from economic digitalization and AI revolution, creating new potential of export and economic growth potential. So what we are going to propose, and you talk about, Professor Armstrong, about the framework, new paradigm shift, right? From your ESCAP side, through our analytical research, we would like to propose and suggest that the new development paradigm shift can focus on an inclusive and people-centered approach. This morning, we organized an event as a part of the global consultation on this beyond GDP issue. And the Secretary General of the United Nations already appointed a panel, high-level panel, to work on the framework. So despite those rising protectionism, and it remains a broad consensus among economists and policymakers across the world, across the country in our region, that economic cooperation and integration generates significant positive subs. So that is, I think, the consensus is still there, the aspiration and still there. Thus, at the aggregate level, there should be no shortage of incentives for cooperation and the integration. So going forward, how we are going to conceptualize this inclusive approach with the people at the center. And this new paradigm shift, development paradigm shift, can serve as the primary counter to rising protectionism, and as a primary counter and as a primary incentive for economic cooperation in integration. Very concretely, I have 3 suggestions. Internationally, it needs to balance the development aspiration of both developing and advanced economies. Domestically, better social security network and support for reskilling and job searching are also needed to effectively help local losers in economic integration. And also, we need to think in an innovative way, also in imaginable way about the future connectivity. The connectivity in the, I would say, in a 2.0 way, not only the hard infrastructure connectivity, but the soft infrastructure connectivity. The connectivity in transport, energy, digital network show a trend of converging. So, and how to harmonize also the product standards, quality control, skill certification. This is also part of this soft infrastructure connectivity. All those may facilitate an inclusive and efficient cooperation. Those are some thoughts we will be very happy to discuss in today's session and in the future sessions with the colleagues. Thank you so much, Professor Armstrong.
Thank you very much, Lin Yang. That was excellent. I've been too many conferences and roundtables these days where everything is gloomy and we're on the wrong trajectory and it's all very depressing. But your very positive note, where of course there's no shortage of incentives, as you say, and you're reflecting on the positive, very constructive atmosphere that you've been engaged in these conversations at ESCAP with a strong spirit of cooperation is extremely welcome. So with that, let me hand now to Carlos. Over to you for 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Shiro, for the kind introduction and for giving me the floor. Also, I would like to thank the Asian Development Bank Institute for the kind invitation to participate in this panel discussion. So about this topic, well, we know that regional cooperations exist when parties involved are sharing common interests and common objectives, but it can also happen when parties have different interests. And this is in particular when these interests could complement one another. So in many cases, it's not easy to agree on initiatives or mechanisms, but there are ways that we can facilitate the process and take incremental steps to cooperate. So APEC is one example for that. So in the case of APEC, as Shiro mentioned earlier, we use a voluntary and non-binding approach to promote cooperation. So unlike WTO, for example, or other binding mechanisms, so we don't have a dispute settlement or dispute resolution mechanism to enforce what the parties have agreed or committed. Some people say this is a disadvantage, but this approach also has advantages. For example, it could facilitate cooperation because it will allow government officials to discuss things that are sensitive. They will be more willing to discuss sensitive topics if we are discussing under a non-binding and voluntary setting. So one example of this is related to the topic of mobility of people across borders. So this is a sensitive topic. And in APEC, we've been discussing this from the beginning. In fact, one of the APEC's most known deliverable is this APEC business travel card that allows business people to move across borders very easily without applying for visas for every single trip. APEC also has been using some differentiated timelines in the past for a number of initiatives. But most recently, what APEC has been doing is to use pathfinder initiatives. So, what's a pathfinder? This is a sort of a pioneering initiative in which APEC members are joining only when they are ready to do so. So they can agree on the initiative, but not necessarily everybody is implementing it or joining immediately. So they will be uh, implementing it or being part of it only when they are ready. So that could be a way that we could also move forward despite the fact that there are increased sensitivities among different parties. In the case of the WTO, for example, they are starting to do something with these joint structure initiatives, the JSI. So we also are seeing that around the world, we have economies of different characteristics and different sizes that are working together. And how this is possible? So, in some cases, it's because, as I said, they share similar ideas, objectives, but in other cases, they have different interests that complement one another. For example, in recent decades, uh, especially from the beginning of the 21st century, there's been a proliferation of bilateral or regional trade agreements. So, in many cases, we can see large and small economies working together. And how this is happening. So, in the case of small economies, their interest is more of an economic nature in a way that they would like to have better market access in larger economies and attract investment, attract capital from those larger economies. But in the case of large economies, market access is not the main motivation. Instead, the main motivation is more political by expanding its influence in smaller economies. So we can see here that we can have a situation where parties have different objectives, but they can complement one another, and that facilitates cooperation. So, in the case of APEC, what we notice is that there has been it's been easy to spot cases of cooperation when there are a lot of non-financial incentives. For example, capacity building initiatives. One of the most successful programs is a capacity building needs initiative to enhance the government officials' understanding of free trade agreements and also improve their capacity to negotiate these agreements. Uh, Also in APEC, what we have seen is that policy incentives could also facilitate cooperation. For example, we have mutual recognition agreements for electronic equipment, or also for licensing requirements, or recognition agreements in order to be able to practice certain professions in different economies. Uh, Also, we notice that it's possible in APEC to cooperate when everybody shares a big vision, despite having disagreements on how to do it, or on the way forward. So in APEC, we have this APEC Putrajaya Vision 2040 that is looking for an open, resilient, peaceful Asia Pacific community for the prosperity of everyone, for the prosperity of people. So this is helping to work in an agenda that is attractive enough for APEC members to sit together, speak one another despite the challenging geopolitical times. So we are in speaking terms, and we can see that there is a lot of cooperation. And in that way, we have done a lot of cooperation recently in areas like sustainability, the digital economy. So we are talking about digital roadmaps, digital connectivity, We just launched a new APEC AI initiative. In terms of sustainability, we've been talking about a list of environmental goods to reduce tariffs to 5% or less. Also, we have a reference list for environmental services. We also launched some goals on the biocircular and green economy. So there are ways to cooperate. We are also cooperating on inclusive matters. And on that, we are focusing on, for example, how to make a transition to a formal economy. So in that way, everybody could benefit from the advantages of globalization, integration. So I think for the sake of time, I will leave it here and I'll talk more about these things during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carlos. Those lessons from APEC are so important and instructive. You know, as you said, the diverse region with a lot of complementarity and shared interests, and building that shared vision that you mentioned, has worked really successfully for the region. We might come back in the discussion to talk about the difficulties when there's some political the politics becomes difficult, but the other ideas of working using voluntary and non-binding cooperation on sensitive topics and the Pathfinder approach, I think are extremely instructive for cooperation more broadly outside of APEC too. So with that, I'll hand to Shamshad, and over to you for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I think I may go overboard a little, if you allow me, because of my long-standing interest on the subject and work also at ESCAP, but also at United Nations and World Bank and Asian Development Bank. As you all know, Asia Regional Cooperation and Integration, and I'll use RECI for short, has been anchored on mutual respect of nation states. Peace and stability and human rights has continued to rise a lot and deepen this cooperation. It has brought enormous benefits and contributed to the welfare of the region. RECI has boosted regional growth with positive cross-border and global spillovers, and promoted resilience in the region to withstand economic shocks and natural disasters. Asia's regional integration has progressed well over decades and unlock the benefits for shared prosperity, stability, and sustainability. Asia's regional integration may be different from European Union, but an amazing success. But it requires careful navigation given the future growth, size of population, and demographic trajectory, size of diversity of geography and geopolitics, etc. As Asian integration deepened, it promoted growth, economic efficiency, productivity, diversified markets, and developed financial markets and financial inclusion. I may not have enough time to provide empirical evidence, but let me get to the bullet points that were sent to me to speak on. So henceforth, I'm going to talk about what I was asked to focus on. First point I'd like to make is Asia's financial integration framework has evolved and matured, and I believe it will go on developing. 2025 ASEAN Economic Community Framework, the central pillar of RECI, explicitly includes a pillar for a resilient, inclusive, people-oriented, and people-centered ASEAN. To mobilize an ambitious regional economy and single market, a pragmatic, practical, inclusive, and cohesive framework is advocated to address shared vulnerabilities and disparities. And this is an element that will focus a little more. Medium and small enterprises, given their edge in promoting employment and competitiveness, have to be the backbone to support vulnerable groups and businesses' financing and provision of digital infrastructure, internet platforms, and building capacities to add value addition and outreach is of course critical. Financial inclusion needs to provide targeted financing programs such as green financing and microcredits to help small businesses grow and access technology. Just a little word about Pakistan Stock Exchange. We have set up what we call a GEM board for the small and medium enterprises and are lining up the financing arrangements for it. The ILO's social protection floors framework is considered essential in guaranteeing a basic level of protection for everyone. Financial social safety nets, subsidizing capacity development, and support for healthcare, education, employment training would protect vulnerable populations from economic shocks. As I said, my focus has been off and on vulnerabilities. Adopting regulatory harmonization and reduced non-tariff barriers and well-established rules of origins that have already been worked out would help to improve, of course, regulatory coordination, provided they are adhered to, and would lower business costs while making it easier for all firms, especially the smaller ones, to operate across borders. International agreements, such as those overseen by the WTO, need to be leveraged for special flexibilities and differential treatment for developing and least developed country economies to help them benefit from states more fully, for these states to benefit more fully from trade. Donor support for LDCs for necessary capacity building would ease their integration into international trade via programs such as Aid for Trade initiative. Improving the quality and accessibility of economic and social data is a key safeguard. It allows policymakers to identify specific challenges faced by marginalized groups and formulate targeted, effective action plans. Integration would be sustainable if benefits spread out to leave no one behind in terms of the vulnerable groups in pursuit of regional growth. My second question that was put to me is where this RESI stands. RESI progress has been uneven and, in my view, still evolving. Sub-regional integration has progressed, albeit in different phases and with wide variations in economic integration over the past decades, influenced by changing dynamics and attitudes towards globalization. East Asia is the most integrated. Southeast Asia ranks second, followed by South Asia, Central Asia, and Pacific are the least integrated. Flexibility and accommodation of states at different stages of development, inclusive approach across RCEP would help prevent widening disparities that may derail cooperation. Employing two-tier mechanism like flexible or what we call ASEAN X approaches to allow countries to join integration initiatives at different speeds and provided they have clear roadmaps for an eventual full implementation. The large-scale regional integration plans such as Euro-Asia Initiative and the People's Republic of China Belt and Road Initiatives has linked and has great potential to further link the Asia-Pacific region to Europe and Africa. And I speak in my capacity as the global advisor for the BRI for 5 years, but now I've stepped down. Trade and investment liberalization across several economies has gained momentum, as the potential globalization to bolster economic progress and raise living standard is evident and has been increasingly recognized. The policies have been supported by the RCEP program that has resulted in unprecedentedly growth and, of course, improved productivity and reduced extreme poverty in the region, but inequality is increasing. Region is moving towards economic and financial cooperation facilitated by seamless infrastructure and digital connectivity in the region to form an integrated market to address shared vulnerabilities and risks. I have to make the point that Asia's financial integration, however, lags behind trade integration due to heterogeneous regulatory frameworks, capital mobility restrictions that differ from country to country, and lack of financial depth and breadth of the region's financial markets. It's pretty low in some countries. My third question that was posed to me is, what are key lessons of RESI? Key principles need to be embraced by all constituents. It requires employing harmonized policy frameworks, rules, and backed by balanced incentive-based approaches. It can be nurtured by promoting gradual, flexible integration that integrates integration for nations at diverse levels of development. Advocating implementation of clear rules-based frameworks that attract investment and enhance market access. When I was growing in the system of the international community, it was very difficult to agree on the rules-based frameworks. Flexibility in RCEP's negative list to allow for flexible implementation line and other exceptions support for less developed economies to safeguard them from sudden regulatory shocks. Nurturing weaker constituents to integrate better in the chain of economic interdependence, as well as design and implementation that we have worked on, need backing of stable macroeconomic and prudential frameworks to foster stability. The fourth and the last question posed to me was, how has the regional initiative harnessed resilience and acceleration for sustainable implementation of regional integration framework across the board? So to that, my answer is that the core lesson of regional integration experience of Asia is challenges and intricacies call for pragmatic, multi-speed approach that balances liberalization with national policy space for constituents at different stages of development while offering tangible economic and stability incentives. It is crucial for successful long-term sustainability of regional cooperation. In this context, RESI needs to be backed by persistent regional peace and stability. And the equitable distribution of Asia's integration benefits requires holistic approach that promotes pro-growth strategies, strategic infrastructure development and connectivity that offer hard infrastructure, roads, railways, power grids, ICT links, and we have worked on that through ADBI World Bank investments in the region to connect landlocked and less connected areas with regional growth hubs, as well as soft infrastructure, inclusive policies, and robust institutional mechanism. Investing in cross-border infrastructure development, transport, energy, ICT, and etc. are vital components for the formation of regional value chain and requires dedicated financing mechanisms, sometimes facilitated by regional financial institutions. Enhancing effectiveness and efficiency of infrastructure. It is critical to promote private sector and PPPs in the implementation and involve civil society in decision-making and assessment processes of integration policies and its implementation. Establishing clear, transparent, and legal binding rules-based framework, including those for rules of origin, intellectual property right, and customs procedures is well recognized. However, it is critical to create strong linkages and interdependence to foster mutual incentives for implementation of clear rules-based frameworks that attract investment and enhance market access. Building trust, of course, is key to cushion economies against adversities. Among others, besides adopting pragmatic, non-confrontational approach and well-structured economic projects, it is critical that tariffs are reduced on goods and customs. Procedures are simplified. AFTA began with tariff cuts, which later facilitate broader economic incentives. Promise, last few points, pursuing non-economic incentives for peaceful dispute resolution and multilateral cooperation to mitigate the high economic cost of conflict, which among others can be driven by shocks of deeper integration of weaker economies into regional value chains, example, electronics and heavy manufacturing. And we do need this given the US stance now vis-a-vis some of the countries. Fostering technical cooperation for capacity building and knowledge transfer helps member states, especially the less developed ones, to effectively implement complex agreements and manage integration. Harnessing sectoral cooperation opportunities, example in e-commerce, energy, agriculture, tourism is critical to leverage the comparative advantages of diverse economies and encourage further economic diversification. Ensuring vigilance over non-tariff barriers as they disproportionately affect less developed countries' ability to export goods. Creating transparent, open databases of NTMs and establishing feedback mechanism for businesses will be critical. Across countries, there is need to offer targeted technical and investment support for less developed economies to meet regional standards and participate effectively in value chains. Specific funding for education, skills development, and vocational training system, and its effective deployment will help ensure the workforce can adapt to new demands for economic restructuring. To conclude, there is a regional desire and great potential in future to deepen integration across region. To achieve, I recommend the region immediately accelerates implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its goal to re-strategize themselves and offer impetus to the region's integration. I am one of the 4 ASGs of the United Nations, later promoted to Undersecretary, but who actually built this architecture of sustainable development goals, and nobody can be so distressed as people like us who work day and night and ensured all the member states bought into it along with development of the sustainable finance architecture. So let me end there. Transboundary goals require effective cross-border solutions and digitization to resolution of complex regional challenges and effective management of energy, water, and other resources. We really need to collectively advocate for some of these points that I have mentioned because I have worked at the grassroots. I have structured transaction to harness the cross-border linkages, whether I was in Asia Pacific or Middle East and North Africa. I stop here and thank you for inviting me to ADBI.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shamshad. That was very comprehensive and excellent from the position of experience across the board, as you said, and a nice reminder that the cooperation and integration is not going to be sustainable without social protections, without a focus on inclusivity, on different speeds for different countries and capacity building. And just on that, you did talk about implementation and how important that is. I think maybe we can come back to this in the discussion. Even when countries do agree to do, to make commitments, even if they're non-binding or even if they are binding, like we're seeing in RCEP, implementation sometimes lags, and what instruments we might use to keep pressure on countries for their own benefit, so like a scorecard approach that ASEAN used to have, and other mechanisms in APEC. But we can come back to that in the discussion. For now, let me pass over to Peter. Over to you for 10 minutes, Peter.
Well, thank you, Shiro. This couldn't be a better time to have this conversation, and congratulations to ADBI for bringing us together to have it, because economic cooperation to deepen regional integration has never been more important than it is right now. Now, I don't want to rain on a happy parade, but I think my starting point to work out how to go forward on this is to observe that all the geopolitical forces in the world, of course, today are aligned against progress with cooperative integration. And that's a major problem we face. So we have to work out how, in these circumstances, we can make progress on this front. The drift, of course, began after the global financial crisis, and the conference itself has emphasized all the elements that now play into this, including the latest big element, which is the Trump tariffs, and US, as Jeff Sachs put it, US withdrawal, effectively, from international cooperation, international economic cooperation at least. So mobilizing the political will in these circumstances to swim against the tide is not easy. And the first step in doing that, I think, is to work out what the scale of the problem is, and then how doing certain things will alleviate the problem. And I think in our region, ASEAN's done a pretty good job so far in doing that through its geoeconomic task force, in which it explored and analyzed the impact of developments in the global economy, the policy uncertainties there are, not only around the Trump tariffs, and what effect they would have on the regional economies. And then ask the question, well, what can you do to alleviate those effects? And of course, you ask the first question, and potentially those effects are very damaging, very serious. If contagion gets out of hand with the tariff process, then there'll be very big impacts on income and employment in our region, particularly on the ASEAN countries, which are very open and exposed. And the conclusion in respect of what you can do about it, of course, is actually to more deeply liberalize, more deeply deregulate, and more deeply integrate yourself in order to overcome and offset those costs from the protectionist forces that are impacting on our region. So that's a pretty good starting point, because it helps mobilize the political will that's necessary to do something about it. And that's the starting point where I want to begin. Now, let me agree entirely with Carlos and the rest of the panel about the importance of talking through the processes. The APEC process, for example, can be very important in these circumstances in leading people to slow down, to back off, and to avoid even worse mistakes than they've already made. This is a very important part of the process of working out what to do about this in order to encourage deeper regional economic cooperation. But the truth is that creating new ideas and new arrangements for economic cooperation in our region is not going to be easy in the current environment. So that leads me to essentially what I think is a two-pronged kind of recommendation. And the first prong is that in these circumstances, what you need to do is take the established arrangements that we have and turn them to the purpose of facilitating and deepening cooperation within the region. Use the established arrangements. Don't try to reinvent things, because it's very difficult under the power of the drift in geopolitical thinking at the moment, policy thinking at the moment, to put new things on the table. So use those mechanisms. And the second thing, the second prong, as it were, is to elevate concerted unilateral action, liberalization and deregulation, for example, as a mechanism or a mode for accelerating economic integration. Both of those strategies avoid pushing against the tide and put maximum emphasis on doing what is in your own national interest, but has a common purpose. And that will lead to there being fewer political obstacles to making progress. The second recommendation I think I'd have is that what we need to do now is prioritize national goals that have traction in the region and internationally. And this leads me back to where Jeff Sachs was in the last session with a very optimistic vision of what this region could do in very pessimistic times. But turning that optimistic vision into practical outcomes is what we need to do. And that means you have to focus on national interests that you can get international traction with. And of course, if you think about the areas in which you can do that, the areas about which Jeff Sachs spoke in that last session are the important areas in which that's still the case. The United States might have walked away from the Paris Agreement, but the rest of us haven't walked away from the Paris Agreement. And the climate change or decarbonization agenda is the most important agenda that we have collectively in the region today. It involves infrastructure development, financing, investment, and regulatory reform on a massive scale in order to achieve the commitments that our countries have made to decarbonization over the next few decades or so. So what we can do here is nothing less than, through deeper regional integration, transform the whole structure of regional industrial production and trade over the next 20 or 30 years, like we did over the last 20 or 30 years, with massive spends on new infrastructure, decarbonized industrial capacity, and the new technologies that Jeff mentioned that are necessary to make it all happen. So getting a focus like that has resonance collectively internationally, but about which you can act nationally and together in order to achieve cooperation is, I think, the way to go. It's an agenda for the next 20 or 30 years, as I said, and it won't be achieved in time or at the lowest possible cost without regional cooperation. We need it desperately to achieve this agenda. So how can we get the change that we require? I think the first thing is just the challenge, for example, of putting a price on carbon. It's not an easy thing to get countries to collectively to agree to a price that's sensible on carbon. So we have to do that step by step. There's work to do in iterating towards a price on carbon in our region. Europe is further advanced than most on this, with their CBAM now in place. But that's a challenge for us that we have to face. And so we'll iterate towards a European solution with that as a reference point over time and take step-by-step action towards doing it. We have to make the task manageable too. This is a very complex endeavor, policy endeavor. It involves not only just direct engagement in the production of new non-carbon technologies. It involves a whole lot of interactions between policy theatres right across the board that we have to cooperate with. So making the task manageable is the first step, and then you take it step by step. Decarbonisation, for example, of major carbon-intensive sectors beyond the power sector, like iron and steel or petrochemicals or cement, These are tasks that we must endeavour to pursue in our region. The region produces over 60% of the world's steel, for example, and it's one of the most carbon polluting industries in the world. In Northeast Asia alone, the steel industry accounts for 15% or roughly 15% of total carbon emissions. So greening the steel industry in our region would be a major achievement towards achieving carbon goals in this part of the world. So we can work towards decarbonising that industry with cooperative endeavours across the steel producers and the steel consumers in our region to iterate towards the decarbonisation of the steel industry with regional and international cooperation, bringing together the stakeholders to work through the regional arrangements that will be necessary to achieve that outcome is the first step. And this is where Carlos's processes become so important, whether it's in APEC or whether it's in RCEP's economic cooperation agenda, whichever, their processes that can be brought to bear, their established processes that can be brought to bear on achieving this objective, this goal. So use the economic cooperation process in RCEP, for example, to promote green trade, green finance, green technology transfer. It's there to be used. It's lagging in implementation now, but now's the time, as the ASEAN's concluded through the Geo-Economic Task Force, now's the time to accelerate implementation. So to conclude, I think there are practical way forwards which will change the whole structure of our economy over the next 20 or 30 years, and that we can begin to work on now without moving very far from the established arrangements that we have in place to make it workable. Thanks, Shiro. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Peter. No, that was an incredibly important intervention. And the idea of course, focusing on established arrangements and institutions we already have, because creating new ones are going to be extremely difficult. So I might pose a quick question to you, Peter, and then to Shamshad. You know, we've focused on ASEAN, on APEC, on RCEP, because those are the success stories and the assets we have that are mostly in East Asia or Asia and the Pacific. But how do these arrangements become more inclusive of, not even through formal membership, but more inclusive of South Asian interests, for example, or broader membership? You know, is there a way to invite them through processes that Carlos mentioned as observers? I note that the CPTPP ministerials finished today, and they've got Costa Rica and Uruguay lined up to join soon, but Indonesia, Philippines, UAE probably pushed back a little bit, but, you know, ignoring the China issue. So accession is going to be very difficult, but I think it has to remain open. What do we do in the meantime before economies can accede? So Peter, if you could, we're running out of time, unfortunately, but quickly on that, and I might turn to Shamshad on that same question, and then come back to Shamshad and Carlos on the implementation question, how to keep them.
Let me start by making a few observations about RCEP to begin with. It's a pretty open arrangement, and its economic cooperation agenda in particular allows openness to participation by non-member countries. There's no reason why RCEP can't invite non-member countries to participate in some of its economic cooperation activities, and that would be a positive endeavour. Jeff Sachs mentioned the openness or otherwise of RCEP to India. The door is open to India. India has chosen to stay out of RCEP, but it could walk in tomorrow, so long as it, of course, commits to the standards of RCEP membership. It could walk into tomorrow, and it would be welcomed by China and all the members of RCEP if it did that. But meanwhile, there's no reason why RCEP can't open the door to Indian participation in its economic cooperation deliberations. And it as an inclusive arrangement, it should do that. And I think that's behoves the other arrangements that we have too. I think it is disappointing, extremely disappointing, the approach of CPTPP to membership and the way in which it doesn't establish real pathways to broader participation in the arrangement, because there are clearly countries of importance, China among them, Indonesia among them, that have ambitions to join CPTPP, know that they are not qualified to join CPTPP immediately. We want a pathway forward to join CPTPP. So that's a very important area to facilitate, a very important way of facilitating closer economic integration, to open up these arrangements, make them more inclusive, including through membership, but including through participation in the process of discussion organized around them already.
Thanks, Peter. Shamshad, I wonder what your response is to what Peter's spoken about, but also the question of how to make arrangements more inclusive.
Right. I think Peter makes a lot of valid points, and I don't think there is any need of trying to contradict that or to expand it further, because he's raised questions and also answered them very effectively. You know, from Asia's perspective, of course, I was speaking a few weeks back on how do you navigate through this US-China trade and tariff wars. I'm sorry, I need to shut this off. Tariff and trade and tariff wars. And of course, it's not going to be easy. But when United States abandons you, Asia is a very large continent. And there is China. And there was a very persuasive speaker from China who directly works with President Xi, assured the whole group, and this was in Islamabad, Pakistan, that there is a whole degree of things that China can do to lift the rest of the Asia. It's been doing it through the Belt and Road Initiative, but also I can tell you, sitting in Pakistan, the amount of investments that have come into Pakistan have helped us resolve our energy crisis and virtually developed a lot of value chains, etc., etc. So I think we count on a process that will naturally lead to countries developing their own capacity, raising their own domestic resources, which are currently at very low level, almost 9.8 to 11, 12% of GDP, which limits your capability to invest in your country or in your region, or to have cross-border investments. And I think this is a real major impediment for future growth of Asia's regional cooperation, rather than the United States. Everybody has been looking to US because it's a big market, so it can absorb anything you send. And there are lots of cheaper goods that went to US and benefited the consumers there. But I think we need to reposition Asia. And in our communication, an analysis we need to write more analytically into what can Asia subregions do. Now, South Asia subregion is behind, but ASEAN, as was just pointed out, needs to open up arms to also include South Asia members. It is more flexible towards India, but it's the less developed or least integrated that require the grace from ASEAN to inclusive. And that doesn't mean just letting them take it over. I think in any case, ASEAN gives a very strong competition. It has an edge on that. It's got competitiveness. But the advantage that these countries have, and I can tell you on South Asia, is the small and medium enterprises will bring in so much competition from that originate in Asia, South Asia, to allow ASEAN, if they developed integrated production networks. And that's what's needed for the futuristic value chains. I can tell you, listening to China, that China is ready to take over the trading and shifting the trade patterns. Vietnam is already benefited, and all the other smaller economies are being lifted by China. So I don't think we need to fear too much about the United States position. Now, climate change. I've done a lot of research on climate change, both in Pakistan as well as Asia Pacific. I think this is a really major threat, and it's a cross-border issue. It's not so much about the carbon emissions that we produce in Pakistan. It's the global emissions and cross-border emissions, and we have no control. And that's where the global compact needs to work. I think entities like G20 and others could play an important role, but also other global entities. And unfortunately, our major COP framework has been a lot dysfunctional. And I think the more developing countries voice their concerns, it will be greater to unwind some of these past problems. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Shamshad. Yeah, the China lifting economies around it, of course, there are others that are worried about overcapacity, but China's not going to be able to make everything, and already there's a lot of capital moving out of China for various reasons, high costs, but also diversification. It's looking for other production bases. So it's a matter of deregulation, as Peter said, and getting the settings right to improve the business environment so that you can accept that foreign investment. So I think that's an important reminder. But Carlos, coming back on implementation, this is an area where I'm sure you've thought a lot about how a non-binding voluntary arrangement can encourage those laggards who have made commitments and who want to continue with liberalization, deregulation. What are some mechanisms here for encouraging implementation?
Well, in the past, we could say there was a lot of peer pressure from those who implemented on those who didn't implement. But I think that now the main pressures are probably domestic, in a way that those that are not implementing the reforms, the necessary measures, are worse off than the others. So I think that's going to be that's a very important component. And one of the things that I think it's missing a lot in international cooperation is that when there's a problem, we talk about the substance, about the topic, but we don't talk about much on implementation. And for implementation, what is very critical is that we need to build strong institutional frameworks to not just enhance the proper cooperation, but to enhance policy coordination. Because to implement these measures, these are very complex. We need a whole of government approach where all line agencies are on the same page and will be talking, collaborating one another. So what we can see is that in many governments, unfortunately, institutions work in silos, and that makes it very hard to implement reforms. So there are seen as fiefdoms for each of the authorities, and those things have to change. So there has also to be a more coordination, more participation between the public sector and also the business community and civil society. And that's how it's then relatively easier to not just to implement, but to make these actions more sustainable. Otherwise, there could be a new government and change everything, and the new government will be starting the things from scratch. So I think it's important to look at the process. And on this, to start getting support, to get the buy-in from different actors, it's important to show some benefits. And on that, my advice is to focus on three things, right? Regulatory matters, also economic matters, macroeconomic matters are important. And the other is institutional matters in terms of keeping the rule of law, having an independent judiciary, among other things. But in terms of, for example, regulatory matters, right? Regulatory coherence, and we need to have an enabling business environment to ensure that it's easier, faster, and easier to do business, and everyone will have an opportunity, an equal opportunity. And we need to make sure that regulations in place will make sure that the benefit of being formal is going to be greater than the benefit of staying informal. So that could help us to have some positive spillovers in the system. In terms of regulatory issues, the consistency is very important, but also it's important to have, an open system, an open economic system. Economic openness is critical for this. That will help us to attract investment, capital, and to those that create jobs to feel confident that their investment is safe. So when we talk about digital infrastructure, digital connectivity, a lot of resources, money needs to be put in place. And that money cannot come just from the public sector. Private sector also has to contribute. But if we have regulations that, for example, put restrictions in the movement of data flows, it's going to be hard to get IT technology companies to come to the economy, to the country. So we need to look at whether, for example, is the government gonna pursue a regulation looking at international customary law or other sort of arrangements. So I think these areas are important. And just to finalize, I say that economy matter. And we need to provide a stable atmosphere for investors. So it's important to keep in mind always price stability, to have a reasonable cost of credit. Access to credit is very important to equal the level field. No barriers also to the movement of capital flows, tendency of foreign currency, and open markets. So I think those are the basics. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. And breaking down silos in decision making. I mean, the example of ASEAN this year and bringing the economic ministers together with the foreign ministers, I think was a really significant breakthrough. Now, look, we're quickly running out of time, but I do want to go to Jamel for a quick question and hopefully a quick answer. So over to you, Jamel. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry for that. Thank you very much, all, for very interesting perspectives. I have one question very quick about, do you think that this regional incentive and for cooperation can be extended to a very important point, which is the production of critical minerals and metals? Professor Drysdale talked about the production of steel. It seems that for ensuring a path towards a quick energy transition, the production of this kind of commodity goods would be very important. And we know the central role of China into this refining a global value chain. So how do you see what kind of incentive can be put to ensure kind of cooperation to this very important productions? Thank you.
Who would like a go at that very big question right at the end? Very quick answer.
Well, the quick answer is yes. Of course, it's a central interest currently in the whole region, and it's been made a central interest because of developments in the market and the contest between the US and China, and third parties like the rest of the region should be actively engaged in it. They have interests as producers. Australia, Indonesia, we all have interests as producers, and we should be cooperating in the widest possible way to ensure that the markets are deepened and widened in a way that provides more resilience and security for all the participants in the market. This is exactly the kind of cooperation that can be done around the current, the established arrangements. For example, in the economic cooperation agenda in ASEP, it could be an issue that's taken up. But the issue that I mentioned of the imperative to decarbonize the iron and steel industry in our region is another such issue that's important to take up in these theatres. And commonly, these are not issues that are taken up in the economic cooperation arrangements that we have. But the established one in ASEP, the APEC process and so on, provide ready vehicles for taking these issues up. And they are big issues that will affect the whole pattern of production and trade in our region going forward.
Thanks, Peter. And look, we're fast out of time, so I better quickly thank everybody. That was a really productive session. Thank you. As was mentioned a few times, there's no shortage of incentives. There's complementarity with the diversity that we have and shared interests. As Shamshad said, there's a desire and potential to deepen cooperation and integration. You know, it's how do we mobilize that political will, as Peter said. And we've got a lot we can learn from the region and what's worked. We've got some significant assets in the architecture of economic cooperation. I think ASEAN is the key here, given the principles that guides ASEAN. And out of that, ASEP, of course, and the inclusive nature, and how we can learn from Pathfinder approaches beyond and deploy them beyond ASEAN and APEC. So the reminder, of course, of inclusive integration, how important that is with social protections. Otherwise, communities will retreat. So using the established arrangements, I think something that came out strongly for me was organising cooperation around the imperative of decarbonisation. And that's where national incentives can align with regional and global needs. And that's where, of course, the concerted unilateralism can come from. So, you know, we want peaceful resolution of disputes. I think there are some really positive signs, like the number of countries signing up to this MPIA, you know, that want WTO rules enforceable, the multi-party interim appeal arbitration arrangement. So that's a preference for peaceful resolution of disputes. I think there's a lot that we can do in this region, has the weight and the responsibility to make a difference more globally. So it's been a really useful discussion for my thinking. I want to thank our 4 panelists very much for sharing their insights. Thank you to ADBI for the invitation, but also for convening this important discussion. So please join me in thanking our panelists, and I'll hand back over to our organisers. Thank you.
Thank you.